words may be used against them, which contains thousands and thousands of quotes from scientists from all ages, and there's a CD in the back which you can look at very quickly on that CD. Probably find it on there. Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious, if evolution is true, you have no basis to determine right from wrong. There's no absolute moral authority. If evolution is true, Hitler was right. Hitler was certainly trying to promote the evolutionary theory. You can read many folks who've written about him and say, yeah, that was his goal. I ask people this question all the time. Maybe you've got an answer, Dr. Gabrielchi. If evolution is true, how do we determine right from wrong? Where is the standard to determine right from wrong? If evolution is true. If evolution is true, the strongest survive. It's tooth and claw, struggle for life. And the biggest guy, wins. But if the Bible is correct, then God decides right from wrong. And some people don't like that idea because it chaps their mind.
Next question.
Get some Vaseline, man. You're going to need it. We'll be good.
What is the purpose of the other planets and stars?
What is the purpose of the other planets and stars? I don't claim to know the answer. I have a couple ideas. I'm sure I'll get misquoted on this one too. The planets certainly do shield us from an awful lot of meteor strikes. I mean, if you take a look at the moon, obviously it hits borax quite a few times, as well as Mercury. I think maybe the stars and planets are out there for the oh wow factor. Why do people put chrome on their cars? People go, oh wow. I don't know. I know one thing, when I step outside and look at the stars and the planets, I say, wow, what a mighty God we serve. So, that may be the purpose. It may just be because God's not the crow. It doesn't cost him a thing to make it. He didn't even lift his finger to make it. He spoke. Everything in the universe was created by the voice of God. When he speaks, the waves lay down, the dead come to life. Everything obeys the voice of God, except some people. Okay?
A bunch of light bulbs up there and not waste all of that precious energy and matter. And by the way, how would you explain, based on that hypothesis, the fact that the overwhelming majority of stars are simply invisible? How would you go, wow, something you can't see? Anyway, the question was the reason why the stars and planets are there. I don't know. Nobody knows if there is a reason. First of all, the question assumes that there is a reason. There may not be a reason. As far as I know, there may not be a reason. If there is a reason, it's certainly not something that an evolutionary biologist would ever be able to tell you, for one thing. You should ask it at most a cosmologist, and even a cosmologist, I would think they would have some problems telling you anything about meaning. Science is not about meaning. Meaning you have to find it yourself. Science cannot give you that answer.
Next question. Monkeys evolved into humans as a result of unfavorable environments. Why do monkeys continue to exist?
The grandmother effect. I already answered that question. I think could we go for another one, or do you want to give an answer to that?
Please name some absolute evidence for evolution.
Absolute evidence for evolution. Well, I don't know even what that means, actually. Absolute. Well, I don't know. The fact that the HIV virus is changing under your very nose is pretty absolute to me. That is a kind. Yes, the virus hasn't turned into a banana yet, but nevertheless, it is evolving under your very nose. The fact that you might have problems getting rid of infections because antibiotics have selected, by natural selection, for more and more resistant bacteria is another example of a pretty absolute. You can observe it yourself. The fact that you cannot spray any more pesticides in your garden and get it clean of pests because it has an evolved resistance, well, that's evolution happening under your very nose, so I consider that pretty convincing evidence. There's a lot more than that. You can look at the DNA similarity organisms. The fact how do we know that fungi and animals are more closely related to each other than either one of them is related to plants? Because if you look at their molecular structure, their DNA today, it is much more similar than either of them is to plants.
I would say there is no absolute evidence for evolution above the microevolution examples which I gave earlier. Now let me take the rest of my 1 minute on the stars. The Hubble telescope was asked to look for 10 days at one spot that they thought was black. After 10 days of viewing a spot about the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length above the Big Dipper, they discovered after analyzing the pictures there were more stars than they could count in that area. And I said the same thing. Wow. That's what I said a minute ago. That's for the oh wow factor. And it worked. Great. Thank you.
Your turn. If we all come from Adam and Eve and sons of Noah, how do we have different races?
How do we have different races? I guess, studying this for quite some time, I've come to the conclusion races is a bad term. We have different colors of people. I think it's very divisive to talk about different races. And I've got that answer on video. Like I said, I have 3,500 pictures. I can't call it up quickly. There are several different theories of where the different skin colors came from. I tend to believe probably the Tower of Babel after the flood is the most likely theory. About 200 years after the flood, there were probably a few thousand people in the world by then. And they were decided to build this tower, you know, and in spite of God's commands to get out and spread out and replenish the earth and all that stuff. And so they decided in rebellion to God to build this tower. God came down and confused their languages. The people had to go off then marrying somebody from their own family. Now, in the original creation, this would not be a problem with the pure genetic code. He married sisters with no problem. Adam married his rib with no problem. But after the flood, you would start to have problems, genetic problems, and today we have 3,500 defective genes, and it's just about genetic suicide to marry somebody closer than a first cousin. So probably after the flood, the Tower of Babel, they broke up, everybody speaking French went one way, everybody speaking Italian went someplace else, and the Germans, and et cetera, and they had to marry family. And under those conditions, like the Habsburg dynasty, you start to get some pretty weird-looking rednecks after a while. So I suspect that the races probably came as a result of the inbreeding a few hundred years after the flood, Tower of Babel. That's one of 4 possible explanations from Scripture. That beats believing all the races came from a rock by a long shot.
I wish you would stop saying that. No evolutionary biologist believes that we come from a rock. But anyway, the other thing to do is you realize that he's making it up as we go. I mean, what does it mean to have a pure genetic code? That's not a biological term. I don't know what a pure genetic code is. And in fact, one of the problems with the Adam and Eve story is exactly that marrying your rib is not really a good idea. Your children are not going to be in good shape. So I don't even know what the pure genetic code is. There's no such thing. Genetic code is genetic code. Genes are genes. There's no such a thing as a pure or an impure gene. Genes are different from each other because of mutations. Some of them work better than others, but they're not pure or impure. It's not a genetic term.
What mechanism would you propose to insert new information into the genetic code? Mutation seems unable to do this.
I'm so glad somebody asked that question. First of all, mutations do that, because mutation is, by definition, a change in information, therefore, encoded in the genetic code. Therefore, you do have new information, meaning that you have information that is different from what was there before. If by new information you mean additional information, additional quantity of information, there are several mechanisms that do that. They go under the names of gene duplication, chromosomal duplication, and polyploidy. These are observable under laboratory conditions. You can come to my lab and do it yourself. In a few days or a few weeks, you can actually multiply genes and multiply by natural occurrences, not by artificial means. You can observe genes duplicating themselves, and you can observe chromosomes multiplying into organisms in a way that then they become stable. They have added, essentially, genetic information. So adding genetic information is not the problem. The real question is, what do you do with that genetic information? That's where natural selection comes into play, and it screens out things that don't work very well and keeps things that work a little better. Incidentally, natural selection is not what's called an optimizing mechanism. That is, it doesn't produce perfect things. Sometimes evolution is called